Welcome to the Doctors Warren podcast, where our goal is to educate, empower, and equip you with the health and wellness knowledge to take your wellness to a whole nother level. We're going to use ancestral wisdom, clinical research, and over 25 years combined of clinical experience to bring you an all-in-one place to learn how to take your health to the next level. So welcome. I'm super excited you're here. Let's dive in. Hey guys, welcome to the Doctors Warren podcast. I am your health expert, Dr. Nathan Warren, and I cannot wait to dive into today's topic. It's going to be all about the cost of chronic inflammation. And when we talk about chronic inflammation, we are talking about cellular inflammation. Now, the main point to start with is understanding that there is a significant difference between acute inflammation and chronic inflammation. In acute inflammation, it's a good thing, right? If you turn your ankle playing soccer over the weekend, or you bend over, pick something up, and feel the back go out. Acute inflammation is a rapid local response that helps that clears pathogens, repairs tissue after an injury. You need it to be able to recover appropriately. That is acute inflammation. When we're talking about chronic inflammation, I love the way that the Nature, right, Journal of Nature, the way that they talk about it. It's unlike short targeted acute inflammation, which helps you heal. Chronic low grade body-wide inflammation really kind of hums along for months or years and quietly damages tissues, distorts hormones, and accelerates disease. Large reviews link chronic inflammation to diabetes, heart disease, neurodegeneration, cancer, and autoimmunity. So when we're talking about harmful chronic inflammation, these immune signals, they stay on producing what are called reactive oxygen species, okay? These help to cells, right, when in a high level. Lipid peroxidation, cytokines that damage the cell membranes, and kind of derail and affect mitochondrial function, right? Your mitochondria are the energy producing parts of the cell, right? They are what we call the powerhouse of the cell. Is probably, taking you back to seventh grade biology. That's like the term that we all learned, right? Mitochondria are your powerhouse of the cells. They produce ATP, and chronic inflammation really affects mitochondrial function, creates dysfunction, and it also alters gene expression as well across cells, tissues, and organs. So when we think about, one thing, there's multiple things that all chronic disease have in common, but one of those is going to be inflammation, chronic inflammation at a cellular level. That is one thing that all chronic disease has in common. I would argue the second one that we see is hypoxia, right? We see decrease inefficient oxygen to tissues and organs. So when we think about inflammation and we think about this increase in reactive oxygen species, lipid peroxidation, cytokines, what that starts to make you realize is that you are damaging the cell at all levels, right? You're damaging the cell membrane. And you guys have heard both myself and Dr. Rebecca talk about how life begins and ends on the cell membrane. That cell membrane is where your receptors are for your hormones. Your cell membranes determine how efficiently and how well you can get nutrients into the cell, right? Vitamins and minerals, so that they can become bioactive. And also how well your toxins are able to come out of the cell. Those things are determined in a great amount by how healthy the cell membrane is. So this is why we've always harped on, we want healthy cell membranes. We want healthy cell membranes. And then the other thing, when we look at specifically, there's a study out of the Frontiers, right? Like when we're looking at a scientific journal, we know that again it alters gene expression, right? And you guys have also heard us touch on this topic, but if you haven't, let's kind of take a very brief dive into it. There's something called epigenetics, right? And when we look at epigenetics above our genes, this is the basic understanding that lifestyle plays the majority of a role in how our genes are expressed, right? Some people like to use the terms turned on or turned off, but basically gene expression. And so our lifestyle is the major part that helps to control that. So we're not talking about, genetic issues that somebody is born with, right? Like that's happening in the womb. We're not talking about those things, right? Like some examples of those may be, cystic fibrosis or Down syndrome, things like that. What we're talking about is, like what I see in my clinic, and I have for, 11 years, thousands of patients at this point, is, you're not born with, this autoimmune issue or even type 2 diabetes, but you may be more susceptible to it based on family history, based on what we've seen from a genetic standpoint. And then your lifestyle is what triggers those diseases. And so chronic inflammation plays a major role in gene expression. So we have to remember that. This is something that we want to be able to protect. And this is something that we want to be able to make sure that we are really giving our utmost effort to protect overall. So when we think about, like, again, at a cellular level, right, we have to talk about, inflammatory cytokines, and we also have to talk about these reactive oxygen species, because these really damage the way a cell communicates, right? It damages the way they signal to other cells and tissue and hormones. But it also creates an issue with a rigid cell membrane, right? And with that rigid cell membrane, now we have an issue with getting toxins out and getting nutrients in. This is a big deal, right? Because when we think about it, how good does vitamin D or vitamin B12, how good are those just in the blood, right? The purpose of those being in the blood is then to be able to get them into the cell. That's where they do their work. Same thing with like thyroid hormone or testosterone or progesterone and estrogen. We want them in the cell, right? We want to get them on those receptors because that's where the magic happens. And if we have the damage to those cell membranes, now we're creating cellular dysfunction, okay? At a tissue level, we see inflammation, adipose tissue, the endothelium. So when we're talking about, vessels, right? When we're talking about like specifically heart disease or even brain disease, right? Having issues with, preventing Parkinson's and dementia and Alzheimer's. And then also like the muscles secreting cytokines, right? That ends up spreading dysfunction. Okay, so when muscles secrete these inflammatory cytokines, now we're in trouble at a tissue level, okay? At an organ and system level, as it starts to approach this over time, this is where it starts to contribute to atherosclerosis and insulin resistance and neurodegeneration and sarcopenia, right? Like muscle wasting. We start to see it directly affect those things over time. So again, begins at a cellular level. The difference is too, you guys got to understand this. When it's beginning at a cellular level, that's usually those times where you don't necessarily feel it or see it, right? And this is why we've always argued, both Dr. Rebecca and myself, that health is not based on how we look and how we feel, right? Now, don't get me wrong, those things are important, but health is not based on that, right? Because if we're having damage at a cellular level, we don't always feel or see those things, right? So what is health? Health is our ability to function as close to optimal as possible in order to help our body better adapt to the stresses that we are under and that we go through in life, right? Like, what determines a healthy human being is not staying away from pain, right? What determines a healthy human being is how quickly can they adapt, right, to that injury or to that pain and get back to a quote unquote normal state or healthy state or optimal state. That's what determines health. And so that's a very, very important, concept to get if we want to truly understand how to be a healthy person. So we can't base our health just on symptoms alone, okay? And this is part of the reason Dr. Rebecca and I harp so much on lifestyle, right? And making health and wellness a lifestyle. This is also why we harp on, appropriate testing, right? Like, regular wellness blood work where we're able to see different, functions at a cellular and tissue and organ system level. So that way we can be ahead of the game, right? We're not waiting on those red flags to happen. Instead, we can see some of those yellow markers so that then we can make appropriate lifestyle changes in order to be able to protect the health of the human body before it gets into a tissue level issue or an organ and system level issue, which now we have full-blown disease, right? So we want to make sure that we are getting healthy at a cellular level. And it doesn't matter what we're working with, right? Whether we're talking about autoimmune, whether we're talking about, diabetes or cancer or heart disease, we know that the better you take care of your cells, right? The healthier your cellular function, the healthier your mitochondrial function, your cell membranes, the healthier you are as a human being, right? And as you get healthier as a human being, that's where we start to get into, symptom reduction, and we start to, over time, look better, feel better, move better, right? What should weight loss be? Weight loss should be a side effect of us getting healthier as a human being, and so shifting that mindset can make a major difference in your ability to maintain optimal wellness, right? Or, being able to work your way to that, right? Or staying there. That is a very, very important concept. And we shouldn't be chasing, symptoms. If all we're doing is chasing symptoms, that is literally the definition and the failure of our medical system, right? And hear me well when I say that. I don't mean our whole medical system is a failure, right? We know there's an appropriate time for medications and drug application, right? We know there is a time and a place for, surgeries. We know that those things used appropriately, can be life-saving and life-changing, right? I'm not saying that. But as a whole, our medical system looks to treat symptoms, right? You go in with high blood pressure, they give you a high blood pressure medication. It never solves the reason why you developed high blood pressure, right? It never solves the reason why you developed heartburn or why you developed, hormone dysregulation. And that's where the problem lies. And that's also why so many people are put on medications and they're on them for the rest of their life, right? They never get down to the root cause or the root causes to those symptoms. And that's a big issue. And we want to go the opposite direction. If you're listening to this show, obviously your mindset is saying, hey, I want to go in the opposite direction, right? If you want something different, obviously you have to, act, think, and move differently than other people to get that different result, right? So I know most of you guys are listening to this are on that page, but again, we have to get our mindset correct in this and our principles and concepts about how we view health and wellness we want to kind of take that 180-degree turn away from the majority of how people think about this. Okay, so when we're looking at specific studies on what chronic inflammation does, a good example of this is when we look at a study published in 2017 New England Journal of Medicine. They talk about the direct evidence that lowering inflammation lowers cardiometabolic disease, right? So specifically lowers events. When we look at heart attacks, strokes, things like that, we know that when we reduce inflammation, specifically chronic inflammation, it has an effect on the ability to decrease our risk of having another myocardial infarction or stroke or cardiovascular death. And they even show that without changing LDL, right, which is considered quote unquote the bad cholesterol. And if you guys have ever listened to us talk about cholesterol, you know that LDL is not the bad cholesterol. There's no good, there's no bad cholesterol. Cholesterol is part of our repair mechanisms. And if you have high LDL and if you have high triglycerides and those things, guess what? One of the things you need to do to be able to see those things go into a normal range, you got to address inflammation, right? You have to address inflammation. Other studies have shown brain and neurodegeneration, right? Chronic oxidative inflammatory cascades end up harming neurons and glia in the brain. And they also create mitochondrial dysfunction, which is a central driver to brain disease and neurodegeneration, right? And when we look at, again, back to the Journal of Nature, right? They show diabetes and cancer and autoimmunity, right? Inflammation is deeply involved in the pathogenesis, so the creation across all of these conditions. When we think about sleep and recovery, we know that sleep disturbance, right? So when you don't sleep appropriately, that it elevates things like C-reactive protein, which is an inflammatory marker that we look at, right, when we're looking at, patients' blood work. And I believe everybody should look at. But sleep disturbances affect C-reactive protein. It also affects interleukin 6, which again is an inflammatory component. But better sleep overall, right, lowers that inflammatory tone, which is super important. When we're looking at, peer-reviewed studies on muscle tissue, right? The higher the C-reactive protein, the higher the interleukin 6, the higher the TNF alpha. These are associated with sarcopenia, so muscle wasting and impaired repair, right? An inability or decreased ability for those muscles to recover. So think about that for just a second. If you have chronic inflammation and you're not addressing that, but you're saying, hey, you know what, I want to go work out, you may not and probably are not reaping the benefits of repairing the muscle after you tear it down during the workout, right? Remembering that exercise breaks down muscle tissue, right? Tears, micro tears of that muscle tissue and muscle fibers, and your only ability, right, to build muscle is what? Based on how your body repairs. And so if you are having chronic inflammation or those markers that I mentioned, like CRP and interleukin 6 and TNF alpha, guess what? You are not appropriately repairing those muscles, and you're definitely not getting all of the benefits that come from, working out and exercising. Mitochondria, right? Again, looking at the Journal of Nature, reactive oxygen species, that inflammation feedback kind of loops and injure mitochondria, and they reduce ATP production, which ends up increasing inflammatory signaling. Okay, so major issue with that. And then also, again, going back to a couple different mechanisms, TNF alpha, interleukin 6, these end up creating inflamed adipose tissue that create insulin resistance, create cortisol issues, leptin resistance, aka weight loss resistance, and affects all of those things there. So across the board, we know that chronic inflammation is absolutely affecting our body's ability to support hormones, metabolism, mitochondria, muscle tissue repair, preventing cardiometabolic disease, brain and neurodegeneration, diabetes, cancer, autoimmunity, and sleep and recovery, right? All the things that again, we should care about when it comes to our overall health and wellness. Now, obviously, we talk about a lot of these things. So now let's kind of shift our focus and start talking about some ideas, right, to help modulate, to help, kind of reverse this chronic inflammatory state, right? And so let's start with, from a dietary perspective. A dietary perspective is going to be vitally important, right? When we talk about food, it is essential to life, right? We should be focused on food that nourishes the human body. Like, food is information. Food is, basically energy and frequency. Food is vitally important to how our body is able to create new living tissue, right? And repair itself. So when we think about different studies, when we look at, there's multiple randomized clinical trials that looked at, for example, the Mediterranean diet that shows reductions in C-reactive protein and interleukin-6. Especially when you start talking about organic extra virgin olive oil and, raw sprouted nuts and seeds. And the Mediterranean diet shows up, quite a bit. The biggest reasons for that when we look at the Mediterranean diet is because of how much good healthy fat is in that, plus the amount of antioxidants that are in a Mediterranean diet, right? These antioxidants help to break down the oxidative damage and the reactive oxygen species that create damage on the cell membrane at a cellular level, tissue level, organ and system level as well. Another one that I really like a lot is a ketogenic diet. And I know ketogenic diet kind of got thrown in there as a fad diet, which to me is insane, right? Because our ancestors, whether they wanted to or not, had to tap into ketosis on a pretty regular basis, depending on, what was available when they went hunting or what was available when they went fishing. Did they get anything? Did they catch anything? What was available as far as what was growing, wild plants, fruit, nuts, seeds, things like that they would gather. So tapping into ketosis is vitally important. And so we know that, one of the mechanisms that helps when we look at a meta-analysis actually showed that helps to modulate inflammatory markers, especially in overweight or obese, individuals, is the ketone beta hydroxybutyrate. It ends up in inhibiting something called NRP3 inflammasome. And so this is a major important area that helps to reduce inflammation. That's why we see a ketogenic diet plays a major role in decreasing inflammation, and it does so decently quick, right? But we also want to remember, if we're venturing into a ketogenic diet, that, this is a big, I'm a big fan of doing it in the right way, right? So what does that look like? We are consuming lots of good, healthy fats, avocados, raw sprouted nuts and seeds, organic extra virgin olive oil, olives, coconut milk, things like that. We're consuming those good, healthy fats. And then we're also consuming a moderate amount of amino acids, right? Especially those essential amino acids, good healthy protein. I believe the best source for this is good quality, well-raised animal protein. So grass-fed, grass-finished beef, bison, lamb, venison, wild-caught, fish and seafood. And then obviously like pasture-raised, organic like chicken, turkey, eggs, those type of things. So that's doing a ketogenic diet the right way. There is a wrong way to do it. If you're going and just looking for anything on the shelf that says ketogenic or keto diet, like you're going to run into some major issues, because if you look at those foods, they have 75 ingredients, half of them you don't recognize. So that doesn't always equal healthy. I think it should be a whole food-based ketogenic diet. Usually I recommend kind of like a paleo/keto type of diet. Paleo type of diet basically meaning, meat, fish, eggs, nuts, seeds, fruit, and vegetables, right? We're avoiding those inflammatory grains. We're avoiding the genetically modified organisms that create inflammation. In all of these diets, we should be absolutely avoiding seed oils at all costs, right? Like the soybean oil, the canola oil, the cottonseed oil, the safflower, sunflower oil. We should be avoiding these unhealthy oils, the grapeseed oil, and we should be consuming good healthy fats, right? Like grass-fed, grass-finished butter and ghee, avocado oil, organic extra virgin olive oil, and coconut oil, right? The good healthy fats, duck fat, things like that, right? Fats that come from real food source and doesn't need massive production and even chemicals to create these oils. Those end up oxidizing those damaged seed oils before they ever even go into your body. And also remember too, when you're repairing the cell membrane with all of these good healthy fats, one example I used to give is unhealthy fats consumed over time, they damage the cell for like months. I'm talking like, anywhere from like 3 to 9 months, right? These unhealthy seed oils damage our cell membranes. It's like taking like a bowl of water, right? The bowl of water being your cell membranes. And if you want to turn that water, let's say blue, and you get some food dye, hopefully it's food dye from real plant extract, right? Not that unhealthy artificial food dye, but I'm just kidding. But in all seriousness, you take that food dye, you drop some drops into that water. That's like that unhealthy fat, right? So it turns that water blue, right? So now we have unhealthy cell membranes. Now, the good analogy I like to give is that in order to heal those cell membranes, if you wanted to take that water from being blue to clear, or your cell membranes from unhealthy to healthy, the only way you can do that is if you had like another dropper of water and you just continuously did one by one drops of water until finally it cleared out all the blue. That would take forever, right? It takes so long. That is what it's like when you're healing your cell membranes. So understand that as you begin this process, yes, you can notice big differences, but also understand it takes time for cellular repair and cellular healing, right? So don't get frustrated and don't think this process is going to happen overnight. This is why we recommend making this a lifestyle change, okay? A lifestyle change is super important. Some other things that directly affect, our ability to get rid of chronic inflammation and restore healing to the human body is fasting, right? Fasting's a great way to do it. Why? Because, one, when we fast, right, we naturally get the body into producing ketones and utilizing ketones, right? So a form of ketosis via fasting. And we already went over the benefits of being in ketosis. And we can do this in different ways, right? Like time restricted eating, or AKA, an intermittent fasting. So going, 12 to 16 hours in between your last meal of the day, first meal of the next day. And you can alter that if you love to eat breakfast and you want to have an early dinner, or the opposite of that based on your social, interactions. But understanding that intermittent fasting can be massively powerful for decreasing overall inflammation, right? So, seeing reductions in, C-reactive protein, that's a big deal. So, again, time restricted eating. So kind of lowering that feeding window down to, maybe 6 to 8 hours, where we're getting 2 to 3 meals in. We're not snacking all the time. We're having 2 to 3 big meals, where we're, again, consuming lots of good healthy fat, lots of good healthy protein. Why do we want to do that? Remember, essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, these are essential to our health, right? Essential to how we are able to express health. The other components are, these are what build up the human body. They build up our cell membranes, they build up our brain, they build up our hormones. Oh yeah, by the way, they also help to protect our DNA. They build up our muscle tissue. So we want to make sure we're getting plenty of that in within that eating window there. Also, there are benefits, major benefits to things like, dinner to dinner fasting, 36 to 48 hour fasting, where we start to dive into what we call autophagy, breaking down damaged cellular parts and damaged parts of the body, but also breaking down damaged mitochondria. And that is called mitophagy, which is, super effective and super important as we dive into, some of those like 24 to 48 hour fasts. We get to see some major benefits in decrease in inflammation, and then also some of the more extended fasts, right? Like the 2 to 7 day fast. Again, not all of you are at that point, nor should everybody do those type of fasts. But if you are one of those individuals that is, in a state of health that you can do that, man, that can be a super powerful, tool to utilize to decrease and support, your body's inflammatory reactions. Exercise, right? We know exercise has been shown to lower C-reactive protein and interleukin-6. Consistent programs in exercise can be major benefit. Why? Because the human body is designed to move, right? Life is made to move. The less we move, the more severe disease processes are, and arthritis, and issues with our joints and inflammation. Bottom line is movement is life. At a cellular level, with the way our cells vibrate and the frequency in which they move. But also too, when we think about blood flow and we think about, muscles and joints, and the body is designed to move, right? So if we are not moving, we are dying. There's no gray area there. It's black and white. We have to move the human body. Sleep, right? Again, we want to make sure we're getting great quality sleep. What does that mean? Trying to go to bed around the same time, waking up around the same time, so that we have a healthy circadian rhythm, making sure that we're getting morning sunlight before about, 9:30, 10 a.m. in the morning, getting some evening sunlight, getting that walk after dinner, right? Where you're kind of seeing different spectrums of light, depending on the time of the day. That helps with that prechiasmatic nucleus in the brain, and helps to kind of help set our circadian rhythm and help support our neurotransmitters and our hormones to help with deeper sleep, making sure our room is set to a cooler temperature, right? Think of the kind of like a cave experience. We want it dark, super dark, and we also want it on the cooler side to help us get into that deep sleep, right? Remember, temperature, body temperature, should be in its lowest state at night. Same thing like cortisol should be in its lowest state at night. That's part of the reason I do not recommend exercising at night. I recommend doing that in the afternoon or maybe sometime in the morning. That's a better time to get that exercise in. We want that cortisol at its lowest state at night as well, right? So we want really good sleep. Also, if you have blood sugar issues, blood sugar and insulin issues, metabolic issues, this will affect your body's ability to sleep, because a lot of you guys are dipping in to a hypoglycemic state while you're sleeping, and then you wonder why you're waking up at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, and you can't go back to sleep. Well, you may be dipping in to that hypoglycemic state, that low blood sugar, so the body's waking you up. Some other principles of health that have been shown to lower inflammatory markers and even improve things like blood viscosity and the way you can move blood throughout the body. And that is like grounding and earthing, right? So what does that mean? Getting your bare feet on the ground. Guess what? It's better than free. It's easy to do, doesn't cost you anything to do it, but we know the frequency of the earth and an exchange of what are called negative ions. So again, we're getting those negative ions into the human body, helps to regulate those inflammatory markers. It also helps to regulate our nervous system, so that we're able to see some major improvements with that as well, and kind of balance out our parasympathetic nervous system, which also, by the way, helps with the way we digest food, the way our immune system functions, the way we're able to get that good quality sleep, the way that we're able to see repair and adaptation from your exercise. Again, a major part of being able to ground or earth it's going to help our body with its ability to adapt, right, to those life stressors. So those are things that we can start doing now, making those dietary changes, adding in some fasting strategies, improving our exercise components, making sure we're optimizing sleep and getting our bare feet on the ground and getting plenty of good sunshine. Now, when we think about nutrients and compounds that have been shown to have anti-inflammatory support, right? Things like a high quality, and I say high quality, non-oxidized, thing like fish oil or krill oil can be super important. I always like, if you're going to utilize those, that it's alongside, or in the supplement, things like rosemary extract, or some other type of major antioxidant to prevent, like astaxanthin, to prevent the oxidative damage to that fish oil. We don't just use any fish oil, and we have to also understand that when we look at fish oil, we need to make sure we're taking therapeutic doses. Usually that's like, 2 to 4 grams of fish oil a day is where we kind of see those therapeutic doses. And again, obviously consult your medical physician if you're on other medications to make sure those are right for you. Every individual is different, right? So be aware of that. But again, like EPA and DHA, when we look at something like a high quality fish oil or krill oil, can be really amazing by reducing like those inflammatory cytokines and seeing, I've always seen on blood work when we use that, seeing, some good reductions in support for that C-reactive protein. Several meta-analysis have shown that vitamin D, right? If we are vitamin D deficient, it will increase our C-reactive protein, our TNF alpha. So making sure that we have plenty of good quality, vitamin D. So when we think about vitamin D, if you're going to supplement with vitamin D, I like to get it in the form that is alongside other fat-soluble vitamins, right? A, D, E, and K, but especially vitamin K2. Those need to go together because of calcium transportation and where we're laying down calcium. But again, in nature, you're not just going to find vitamin D, right? You're also going to find other fat-soluble vitamins when we're talking about from a dietary standpoint. So getting those together is very, very important. As you guys know, you can go onto our online store where we have all kinds of different protocols. We have the top of the line supplements that we use both ourselves, both with patients and clients, and really supplementation that we don't just like not only stand behind, but also get to see these things like functional markers change in our patients and clients when we utilize these appropriately, right? So you can go on drswarren.com, DRSWARREN.com, and see our online store there and the supplementation that we recommend that goes alongside of that. But when we look at vitamin D levels, just understand, especially in the realm of chronic inflammation, that we should be looking on blood work, right, to kind of see that from an optimal standpoint, kind of that 60 to 90, 60 to 100 range is what we're looking for. Not just what is medical norm, right? Like if you're 31 or 32, your doctor could be like, oh, see, you're within medical norms. And it's like, no, man, like I want optimal, not just bare minimum, just the lower part of the totem pole, right? We want to be on that upper optimal range. So that's what we're looking for. So most adults are going to fall somewhere between like 5 to 10 to 15,000 IUs a day. Again, make sure that's alongside, things like vitamin K2, vitamin A, vitamin E, some of those other fat-soluble vitamins, I think is the most appropriate way to get it in. And then also things like magnesium, right? Magnesium is fantastic for not only especially for the muscle and tissue repair, but also the benefits of cellular function. We know, think of magnesium as almost like a gateway to get good things into the cell. So we want good quality magnesium. Zinc, right, plays a major role. Several meta-analyses have shown that zinc helps to support good C-reactive protein numbers. Also selenium. Selenium is vitally important to our way that we can modulate inflammation. Things like CoQ10 have been shown to help support and decrease interleukin 6 and TNF alpha. So those are some things that are fantastic. A couple things that I really like to use. Glycine, right? I really love to use glycine, especially with some of my newer patients and clients when we're trying to make them more hormone sensitive and help to work on that receptor activity on the cell membrane. I like to use glycine. Glycine helps with the repair of those cell membranes, decreasing the amount of oxidative damage on those cell membranes. So understanding the benefits of that muscle repair and sleep and some of those things, the anti-inflammatory effects of glycine. Taurine is another one. Taurine, especially looking at some randomized clinical trials in humans, showing some really cool antioxidant activity, anti-inflammatory activity that help to signal metabolic and, muscle recovery. So taurine can be a really great one as well. I also really like to use something called phosphatidylcholine. We use a brand called Body Bio. Again, it's on our online store, drswarren.com. But I like to use that one because phosphatidylcholine is the main fat your cell membranes are made of. So I like to use that one early on with glycine to help start repairing those cell membranes. It makes a major difference there. So phosphatidylcholine is one that I've taken for a long time, that my kids, right? I have my kids take it. Again, major benefits when you're talking about phosphatidylcholine. Another one that I think goes under the radar is molecular hydrogen, right? Little tablets you can drop into your water. There's many reviews and human trials on its help with not only mitochondrial function, but also its antioxidant effects and anti-inflammatory effects. Super easy. That's why usually every morning I start with, some vitamin C in water. I drop a couple molecular hydrogen tablets in there, and then some minerals. And that's how I start my morning. Sometimes that's even how I end my day as well. But that really is a great anti-inflammatory, antioxidant rich way of getting your day started that also helps to hydrate the body at the same time. And then one of my all-time favorites, understand this one, if you're on any type of anticoagulant or blood thinner, this is obviously not right for you. So again, consult a physician if you're unsure. But proteolytic enzymes, right? Proteolytic enzymes are absolutely amazing when we're talking about, things like serrapeptase, nattokinase, bromelain. These things can be super powerful for helping from an anti-inflammatory standpoint. So, especially if you're somebody with a high C-reactive protein, I always like to use, a great quality fish oil or krill oil. I like to use proteolytic enzymes. And then I use something like Inflammatone by Designs for Health that has like resveratrol and curcumin and white willow bark extract and some of those things. And I use those. I have my patients do them in the morning and in the evening. And that's kind of like a wonderful three-headed monster there that helps to support those C-reactive protein levels alongside good healthy diet, sleep, exercise, sunshine, and grounding as well. So, when we think about it, that this is a great way to start diving into helping to support your overall inflammatory levels. And hopefully I've given you enough tools, right, to be able to start seeing, some of these amazing changes within your body, right? And understanding that not only does a lot of just ancestral wisdom and logic tell us all of these things, but again, these are supported by scientific studies, a lot of them randomized clinical trials and human studies, meta-analysis. We've seen these things and we know that exercise and fasting strategies and dietary strategies, supplementation done appropriately, good quality sleep, all of these things play a major role, in seeing your health of the human body get better. So we want to make sure that we are dialing these things in. And again, the lower you get your chronic inflammation, the healthier you are as a human being. And so, go dive into this stuff. Again, when we talk about these approaches, understand, a major component is our mindset shift. A major component is our ability to learn. But again, none of these things are really going to do us any good unless we put it into action, right? So, listen to this. Please make sure if you enjoy this that you share it with people. Leave us a 5-star review wherever you find podcasts. That helps us get our message out much better. But again, put this into action and watch where you are, a month down the road, 3 months down the road, 6 months, a year down the road. If we reduce chronic inflammation, guys, our health has no choice, right, but to move in the right direction. Because again, remember, the body's designed to heal. That is not an opinion. That is an absolute fact. So go take action on this stuff and start getting healthy and well. And remember, if you want to know more information Please make sure you subscribe to our Doctors Warren podcast. Again, leave us a great review. And also go on our website, doctorswarren.com. You can sign up for our free newsletter there. We're sending those out every week with all kinds of great information. And you can also check out, our doctor's favorites there, our online shopping. Everything is there at doctorswarren.com, DRSWARREN.com. And as always, health is a choice, right? And today you guys made a great choice by listening to the Doctors Warren podcast. And I can't wait to see you guys next time.